I got my dream job at NASA, and my son couldn't stop bragging about it. My jealous sister called him a pathetic liar in front of the whole family. The evidence I showed made her cry with embarrassment. I, 42M, never thought a family dinner could turn into a battlefield. But that's exactly what happened last month when my sister decided to publicly humiliate my son over something that should have been a moment of celebration for our family. The whole mess started 3 months ago when I received the offer letter from NASA. After 15 years of grinding through aerospace engineering projects at various private contractors, constantly working on proposals and research papers that went nowhere, I finally got the call. They wanted me for their Mars sample return mission as a senior systems engineer. The salary was incredible. The work was everything I'd dreamed of since I was a kid watching shuttle launches on TV, and the security clearance process had been brutal, but worth it. My son was 13 and absolutely over the moon about it. He'd always been into space stuff, probably because I'd raised him on documentaries about the Apollo missions and late-night stargazing sessions in our backyard. When I told him about the job, his eyes lit up like I'd just handed him the keys to the universe. He wanted to know everything about what I'd be doing, whether I'd meet astronauts, if he could visit the facility, all of it. The problems began when he started telling his friends at school. My sister had always been competitive with me, ever since we were kids. She'd gone into marketing and done well for herself, but there was always this underlying tension whenever my career came up. She'd make little comments about how engineering was boring or how I was wasting my potential in technical work when I could be making real money in business. I'd learned to ignore it over the years. But when my son started posting about it on social media and talking about it at family gatherings, something in her snapped. She started making comments to other family members about how it sounded too good to be true, how NASA barely hired anyone anymore, how she'd looked it up and couldn't find my name anywhere on their employee directory. She planted seeds of doubt everywhere she could. I didn't know about any of this at first. My wife mentioned that my sister had been asking weird questions about my job, but I figured she was just being nosy as usual. I was busy with the transition, wrapping up my old projects and preparing for the security briefings at NASA. The job was real, the paperwork was overwhelming, and I had bigger things to worry about than my sister's jealousy. Then came my parents' 40th anniversary dinner. My mom had planned this big celebration at a nice restaurant with the whole extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, about 30 people total. My son was excited because he'd made a whole presentation on his tablet about space exploration that he wanted to show his cousins after dinner. He'd been working on it for weeks. Everything was fine until dessert arrived. My son was showing his presentation to a few of his younger cousins, talking enthusiastically about Mars and the mission timeline. I could see my sister at the other end of the table getting more and more agitated, her face getting red, her jaw clenching. Her husband was trying to calm her down, but she brushed him off. Then she stood up. The whole table got quiet. She looked directly at my son, and her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear when she called him out. She said he needed to stop spreading lies about his father working at NASA, that she'd done her research and knew it wasn't true, that it was pathetic how he was making up stories to make himself look cool at school. She said I'd probably just gotten a job at some small contractor and was exaggerating it, and that my son had turned it into this elaborate fantasy that was embarrassing the whole family. The silence that followed was deafening. My son's face went white, then red. His hands were shaking as he held his tablet. Some of the younger kids looked confused. My parents looked horrified. I felt my blood pressure spike in a way it hadn't since my last major deadline crunch. My son looked at me with these desperate eyes, like he was begging me to make it stop. My wife grabbed my hand under the table, probably sensing I was about to lose it. But I kept my cool. I pulled out my phone very slowly and deliberately. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make a scene. I just asked my sister very calmly if she'd like to see some evidence before she continued calling my son a liar in front of the entire family. She doubled down, said I was probably going to show her some fake documents, that anyone could Photoshop an offer letter, that she wasn't born yesterday. She was on a roll now, clearly thinking she had the upper hand. Some of our relatives were starting to look uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. I opened my email and pulled up the official offer letter with the NASA letterhead, the signature of the department director, the detailed breakdown of my position and salary. I handed my phone to my father and asked him to pass it around the table. Then I pulled up my employee badge photo from the onboarding process, the one with the NASA logo clearly visible and my name and department listed. But I wasn't done. I opened my work calendar and showed the meetings I had scheduled for the next week, all with NASA email addresses and official project names. I pulled up the security clearance confirmation email from the Office of Personnel Management. I showed them the internal NASA directory where my name and photo were now listed under the Mars sample return team. My sister's face changed color about 4 times during this process. She tried to interrupt, tried to say something about how she'd just been concerned, but I wasn't letting her off that easy. I asked her very directly why she'd decided to humiliate a 13-year-old kid at his grandparents' anniversary dinner instead of just asking me privately if she had questions about my job. The whole table was staring at her now. My mother actually started crying, not because of what I'd said, but because of what my sister had done to my son. My father looked angrier than I'd ever seen him, and that's saying something because the man rarely showed emotion. My sister tried to apologize to my son, but it came out strangled and insincere. She said she'd just been trying to teach him about being honest and not exaggerating. I cut her off and told her that the only person who'd been dishonest at this table was her, spreading rumors about my job to other family members and calling my son a liar without bothering to verify a single fact. Her husband looked mortified. He apologized on her behalf and said they should probably leave. My sister was crying now, ugly crying, mascara running down her face. She grabbed her purse and practically ran out of the restaurant with her husband trailing behind her. The dinner never really recovered after that. My parents tried to move on, but the mood was killed. My son sat quietly for the rest of the evening, picking at his dessert. When we got to the car, he finally broke down. He told me that my sister had been texting his friends' parents, telling them I was making up stories, and that he was becoming a problem child who couldn't tell truth from fiction. Several of his friends had been acting weird around him for weeks, and now he understood why. I was furious all over again. This wasn't just about one dinner. She'd been running a campaign to undermine my son's credibility at school, with his friends, anywhere she could. My wife had to physically stop me from driving over to my sister's house that night. The next morning, I got a long text from my sister. She apologized and said she'd been stressed about her own job, that she was worried about layoffs at her company, that seeing me succeed had triggered something in her. She admitted she'd been asking around about my job and had convinced herself it couldn't be real because she couldn't handle the idea of me achieving something she couldn't. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to cool down. My son needed time to process everything. He'd stopped talking about NASA at school entirely, even to his closest friends. The damage my sister had done to his confidence was real and visible. Update 1. A week after the dinner, my father called me. He and my mother had spoken to my sister and made it clear that what she'd done was unacceptable. They'd asked her to apologize properly to my son, not just to me. She'd resisted at first, apparently, but my father had been firm. He'd told her that if she couldn't be happy for family members' successes, she needed to work on herself before she'd be welcome at future family gatherings. My sister showed up at our house 2 days later. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept. She asked if she could talk to my son. My wife and I agreed, but we stayed in the room. We weren't letting her near him unsupervised after what she'd pulled. She apologized to him directly. She admitted she'd been jealous of me and had taken it out on him, which wasn't fair. She said she'd been wrong to call him a liar and wrong to contact his friend's parents. She promised she'd reach out to those parents and correct the record, tell them she'd been mistaken about everything. My son listened quietly, then asked her why she'd wanted to hurt him. The question clearly hit her hard. She started crying again and said she didn't know, that she'd been so caught up in her own feelings that she hadn't thought about how it would affect him. She said she'd been a terrible aunt and she understood if he didn't want to forgive her. He didn't say he forgave her. He just nodded and said okay. That was it. She left pretty quickly after that. Over the next few weeks, she did follow through on contacting the parents. She sent emails admitting she'd been wrong and that everything my son had said about my job was true. She posted a public apology on Facebook, which I thought was a bit much, but apparently my mother had suggested it as a way to undo the damage she'd done by talking to so many people about her doubts. My son's friends started treating him normally again. A few of them even asked if they could come over to hear more about what I was working on. I gave them a kid-friendly version of the Mars mission, and they were fascinated. Watching my son's confidence come back was worth more than any apology my sister could have given. Update 2. Things stayed tense with my sister for about 2 months. We saw her at a few family events, but we didn't really talk beyond basic pleasantries. My parents were trying to keep the peace, but they'd clearly taken my side. My sister's husband reached out to me once to apologize again and to explain that she'd been dealing with a lot of insecurity issues that had apparently been building for years. I appreciated the gesture, but I wasn't ready to just move past it. What she'd done to my son wasn't something I could forget easily. She'd targeted a kid to get back at me for her own jealousy. That crossed a line that was hard to uncross. Then something unexpected happened. My sister lost her job. The layoff she'd been worried about actually happened, and she was caught in the cut. She didn't tell anyone at first, apparently spent 2 weeks pretending to go to work while actually sitting in coffee shops sending out resumes. Her husband finally made her come clean to the family. My mother called me and asked if I could talk to my sister, maybe give her some advice on job hunting or connect her with people in my network. I'll admit, my first instinct was to say no. Why should I help someone who tried to destroy my son's reputation? But my wife pointed out that holding on to anger was just going to poison family relationships for years to come. I met my sister for coffee. She looked defeated. She apologized again, more genuinely this time. She said losing her job had given her perspective on how badly she'd handled her jealousy, that she understood now what it felt like to have your professional life questioned and undermined. She said she couldn't imagine doing that to someone else anymore, especially not a kid. I told her I'd help her with her job search, but she needed to understand that rebuilding trust with my son was going to take a long time. She agreed. She said she'd do whatever it took. I connected her with a few people I knew in marketing at aerospace companies. Ironically, the space industry was booming and there were a lot of opportunities. She ended up getting interviews at 3 different places within 2 weeks. One of them was a contractor that worked with NASA on public outreach programs. She got the job. The pay was better than her old position, and the work was more interesting to her. She called me the day she got the offer and actually thanked me, said she didn't deserve my help after what she'd done, but was grateful I'd given it anyway. Update 3. It's been 6 months since that dinner now. My sister and I aren't back to where we were before all this happened, but we're in a better place. She makes an effort with my son, asking about his interests without being pushy, sending him articles about space missions she thinks he'd find interesting. He's warming up to her slowly. The weird silver lining to all of this is that my son is more passionate about space and science than ever. He joined his school's robotics club and is already talking about wanting to study aerospace engineering in college. He says he wants to work on Mars missions like I do. When he talks about it now, there's a confidence in his voice that wasn't there before, like he's been tested and came out stronger. My sister actually came to one of his robotics competitions last month. She cheered louder than anyone when his team won 2nd place. Afterward, she pulled me aside and told me she was proud of the job my wife and I had done raising him, that he was a better kid than she'd given him credit for. I told her I appreciated that, but reminded her that he'd always been a good kid. She'd just been too caught up in her own issues to see it. She nodded and said she was working on being better, that she'd started therapy to deal with her competitiveness and insecurity issues. My parents hosted Thanksgiving at their house last month, and for the first time since the anniversary dinner, it felt almost normal. My sister was quieter than usual, more thoughtful. She asked me about my work at NASA without any of the old edge in her voice. Genuine curiosity instead of competitive tension. My son showed everyone his latest robotics project, and my sister was one of the most engaged people in the room. She asked him questions about the engineering challenges, took videos to show her colleagues at work, told him she'd love to have him come speak to some school groups her company was working with for STEM outreach. The trust isn't fully rebuilt yet. I don't know if it ever will be completely, but we're moving forward, and my son is thriving, and that's what matters most. He knows now that people can be jealous and cruel, but he also knows that the truth comes out eventually, and that having evidence and staying calm beats losing your temper every time. As for me, I'm still loving my job at NASA. Every day I work on systems that will eventually bring samples back from another planet. And every time my son asks me about it, I see that same wonder in his eyes that made me fall in love with space exploration in the first place. My sister tried to take that away from him, tried to make him doubt something real and amazing. She failed, and in the process, she learned a hard lesson about jealousy and family and what really matters. I just wish she'd learned it without hurting my kid first. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real-life-based stories. Thanks in advance.